So as I said, we're going to be going into our final panel now. Tim Burrowes will be moderating this panel, so for ease of time, I'm going to invite Tim and his panel up and he will make the introductions, but please give them a very warm welcome.
I'm here.
Perfect. Hey, good morning. I realised I was looking at LinkedIn. I realised Steve and I have something in common, which I don't know if you know, Steve. We both worked at some point about 20 years ago for the small town of Crawley's best local weekly newspaper. So we do have that in common. So look, so much to go off. So we'll go straight into it, and then I'll introduce our panel as we go. So Melissa, I'm going to start at the far end with you. So
the
Melissa,
long way.
The long way. Yes, it does feel like a long way as well. So I'm relieved that the amplification is quite good, because I don't think I'd be able to hear you from here otherwise. So Melissa is Chief Investment Officer at GroupM. She joined nearly 2 years ago after a dozen years with OMD. And I'm going to ask all of this panel this same question to start off with. What does the role of local media mean to you?
Wow, even before you introduce everyone, okay. For me, and what it means
I've got very
now,
strict instructions from Justin on that. Okay. No time to be wasted with introductions.
I've also been told I can only have a max of 7 minutes. Don't worry, I won't go that long. What it means now, I think it's actually about bringing Australian stories to life and local content. It's providing cultural moments for advertisers and being associated with those moments. And I think it plays an important role on bringing all of that to life at the moment in Australia.
You said Sass wanted me to go in those two middle seats.
And nice and brief as well. Which next brings us along to Sian. So Sian is co-CEO.
Did it look weird from the side?
OMD Australia. And she's been in Australia for the last decade, and before that was in UK media. Now, Sian, we have a bit of a ghostly commentary coming on, but I'm sure that will magically vanish through the magic of live TV very shortly. Same question to you, the role of local media, what does it mean?
So it's very aligned with what Melissa said, really. Like, there's no one better placed to be able to understand culture than Australia and the local broadcasters to do that. So that is exactly the role of local media. But also, more importantly, it's around trust as well, and trusted content, which is becoming increasingly more important, as there are very few brands in market that can actually have the trust of consumers.
Excellent. Thanks for setting the scene on that. Next along, Ben Tatta is a Chief Commercial Officer of TV ad management platform Operative, based in New York. And we might remember Ben from his previous involvement with Standard Media Index as well. So Ben, that question to you next. What does the role of local media mean to you?
I honestly think it's the most relevant content available, especially when you think of like news and sports. It's inherently local, and beyond just media channels kind of tailoring content for the local environment, I think those are two genres where people actually define themselves. In some markets, sports is right up there with religions, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's inherently locally relevant. So best content, most relevant content available.
Thank you for that. Now, I've just realised, because we're sitting like a bus
didn't
stop,
follow the brief, did we?
I'm going to actually move my chair so I can actually see my fellow panellists, or at least glimpse them in profile. So Rod Prosser, as I'm sure most people in the room will know, is Chief Sales Officer at Paramount, which includes Network 10, and he was a board member of Think TV in Australia. Rod, what does the role of local media mean to you?
Thanks, Tim, and good morning. Really, it's if I can answer that in two parts, if I can, and just going a little bit deeper than culture, I think it's the fabric of a really solid democracy. We spend a lot of money and time and effort in producing news and journalism and great shows. And the second part is, we know it works. It builds brands, and for me personally, good democracy, great content that's entertaining, and again, all the points that are relevant that the team have said.
And Jodi, speaking of Think TV, you were until last year chaired Think TV New Zealand, and also the CEO of TVNZ. I'm sure you feel similarly to Rod that the nature of local media at least contributes to democracy.
Yeah, that's right. TVNZ's a national broadcaster in New Zealand. So for me, the role of local is really connecting communities and culture. And you'll never see the global platforms telling the stories that matter to, in my instance, Kiwis. You certainly won't see them turning up for, celebrating the Māori King dying or, the King's coronation or anything like that. So I think the role of local is really important because we invest in local content, we invest in news and journalism, we invest in people, and we pay tax.
That might prove to be one of the most popular points of the day, I suspect, along with the line "Australia is different." I'm sure we're going to hear a few times, but let's make that Australasia to include you as well, Jodi. Sian, I'd like to just build on the point of, because I guess what we're talking about here is those points of difference of a local media versus globalized media. Where do the agencies play into that?
Well, I think agencies need to play in the heartland of their role of existence, which is being the agnostic advisor to their clients and brands. So that might not mean that for the broadcasters, we are the most popular people in the room, because we are there to be able to help from a measurement perspective and connect the whole ecosystem to be able to advise on what that media mix looks like. At the moment, it's becoming harder because we know that consumption is massively fragmented. So we are trying to connect the dots between fragmentation and ROI. But our job is to remain agnostic, develop the ecosystems and measurement infrastructure, which we spent a lot of time doing within OMG and OMD, to be able to really help be that trusted advisor to our clients and partners and make sure that we can help with some agnostic decision making.
Melissa, I'll invite you to build up on that point as well.
I agree with Sian. It is about being advisor and bringing it all together for our clients. Ultimately, we have to work with them to deliver on business objectives, and we've got to look at it agnostic to make sure that it's delivering for our clients in that area. So measurement is also key, but actually at the moment, obviously one of the hardest things to do to deliver that business measurement outcomes, and that's what clients are looking for. So it's our job to navigate that with them together collaboratively.
And I might come at this one in the opposite direction for Jodi and Rod. What is it you want of the agencies when it comes to them acting as an advocate to their clients?
Yeah, I mean, I understand both those points, but I'll challenge the fact that, as Bev mentioned on the panel before, total TV audiences is growing, yet we haven't seen the revenue flow. So to me, I challenge the fact that, and again, I know I missed the breakfast, but there was discussion around chasing eyeballs. Well, if you're chasing the eyeballs and you're looking for mass reach, then you would assume that as an advisor, revenue should be growing back on total TV.
Yeah, Jodi, same question to you.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that. I mean, audiences probably reduced about 3% on broadcast last year, yet revenue was down over 15%. So the math doesn't quite add up in that space. Obviously, we work really closely with the agencies, and I think it's not just the agencies, it's the clients that, that are also instructing or informing the agencies around the things that they want to do at the same time. So, just in New Zealand yesterday, we launched a new campaign for Think TV, which is part of a strategy in terms of collaboration across all of the broadcasters to be able to engage with advertisers to help support that narrative as well, to be really clear around actually New Zealanders are still watching 3.5 hours of broadcast TV every day. It's just bringing them back to the basics and trying to break down some of the lovely acronym we use in our world to really bring it back to actually business outcomes and to be able to support the agencies and the marketers. As we heard at the breakfast this morning, marketers often are challenged by the CEO and the CFO around investing in marketing. Now, I'm a marketer. I've come through the sales and marketing part of the business, so it's second nature to me to want to invest in that, but I appreciate that not all executive teams or CEOs are of the same view.
Ben, I'm going to come to you in a second on the international perspective. I do just want to come back to Mel and Sian, maybe to defend that point on why is the spend still shifting towards the global platforms?
Well, is it though? So what we're seeing is spend massively fragment, right? So if I think about in the last 3 years alone, our teams are having to learn more channels than ever before. Like the current channel that everybody is learning is influencer marketing. That's brand new. They've got brands out there that are going, by the end of 2028, 50% of all of our dollars are going to be in influencer marketing. That's brand new, and we're having to like train our teams in that to really understand that. Retail media was the 2024, it was a year of retail media. Like what you're seeing, or what we're seeing, is spend kind of fragment as consumer consumption, but also our marketing ecosystem is fragmenting as well. So I would probably challenge back that we are seeing a massive shift to just the platforms, because I'd say it's much broader than that. And that's aligned back with consumer consumption, but also the results that we're seeing, which goes back to my point about us being that agnostic advisor.
Interesting. I seem to remember hearing that Standard Media Index are working on providing some more kind of authoritative data on what the shift towards platforms has been or is, but I don't think that's in the market yet. Melissa, same question.
To build on that point, because I agree with Sian, like it's becoming more fragmented, and everyone's talking about the total TV ecosystem or investment declining, which it is, but you've also got to remember the whole marketing investment is actually not growing. So as more and more fragmentation happens and growth happens across all of these platforms, we've got to navigate that for our clients, and we're looking for business outcomes, as you said, Jodi, which is what we're doing, and we play that role. And at the moment, the business outcomes that our clients are focusing on, there's different areas delivering on that. So how do we go with the same investment level to navigate that? It doesn't mean that it just naturally stays where it was. We have to test and learn to actually understand it.
And the final point I'd build on that would be, is the fact that you're not seeing, so there's been massive inflation as well in some key properties in the last 24 months. What we're not seeing is our brands pulling out of those properties, because we know that the effectiveness, in fact, they're doubling down. They're going, they are the staple, they're the one, the holy grail. This is what we don't want to lose. But you do see the effectiveness kind of, and the volume of partners on a plan increasing. Thank you for that.
Ben, the international perspective, are you seeing the same pattern in all the markets you look at?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the, and it was mentioned earlier, SMBs, small businesses are inherently local, and we haven't made TV accessible to them. It's amazing, like in the local market, and I think in Australia, it's actually even more so, search and social represents 2/3 of the advertising, and I think a lot of it is just based on the ease of buying. It's very simple. At Cablevision, I spent years on local. We launched addressable advertising. We thought just the fact that we could target at a local level, all of a sudden the business would grow. It was only when we made that accessible through a mobile app, where you could actually plan and buy an addressable campaign as simply as you could, buying search keywords or social, that we really started to see that scale. So I think one is kind of simplicity in onboarding smaller businesses, which historically haven't really been able to access television. Streaming and OTT, if you look at the growth in advertising, a bulk of that is driven by smaller advertisers, smaller budgets. And I also think it's just a measurement problem. If you're buying impressions, it all kind of looks the same, but when you look at the performance of those impressions across the full funnel, and we saw that here, when you can measure that at a campaign level, the game changes, because nothing delivers the full funnel better than television. And by the way, nothing drives search activity more than television. We're not connecting that today. Search is measured in a silo. The bulk of search activity, especially organic activity, is driven by television and radio and some of the more traditional channels.
Okay, look, one of the, I think, key questions is how the local players should work together. And I don't just mean in television, I think I mean across all media as well. I might start with you this time, Jodi, as you in New Zealand chaired the New Zealand version of Think TV. I guess I find myself thinking about where the local players could or should work together. Is it measurement? Is it just marketing? Is it, I know in the past you've had a premium content exchange. What's the opportunity if they actually do work together harmoniously? And then I'll ask Rod about Australia.
Yeah, I think that, more broadly across both markets, I think a lot of the traditional broadcasters are actually becoming really fit digital businesses. And so when I think about that, the ability to compete with the global players is a lot more real than it ever has been. So I think based on that, the opportunity for the local players to compete to work together is around measurement, but it's also around content or co-exclusive content rights. I think sports is a really good example of that, is thinking about how you can leverage that across pay platforms and free platforms as well. You're right, in New Zealand we launched something called KPX back in about 2016, which was effectively a walled garden for all of our local premium inventory. It was probably a bit before its time, so I think there's definitely opportunities with the rise of first-party data for us to think about that again and probably lean into that conversation across the industry. But as I mentioned, launched yesterday this Think TV campaign. It's the first step, I think, in the industry really thinking about how the local players can work together. But there's also opportunities for other platforms outside of TV as well, so how we partner with other publishers and then other content partners at the same time.
Yeah, so thank you for that. So Rod, I suppose I reflect on sitting in this very same room exactly a year ago for the event, and it feeling very divided. Foxtel was not long gone from Think TV and from OzTam. Since then, you've announced you're stepping back from Think TV. How did we get here, and where do we go from here?
I think that firstly, there's no right or wrong. Every business has a different agenda. The Think TV thing of it all for us was that it just wasn't fit for purpose at this very time for us. Obviously, the landscape is very different. Multiple TV players coming into the market. Certainly, our view is that we should open the tent and keep the discussions going. I think collaboration, both from operations right through to industry marketing, it's really key. We are always talking, and we are thinking about how we potentially might come together as a group. But I don't think this notion of us being divided, it doesn't serve us any benefit, and it's actually not factually true. So I think that you'll see more collaboration. Because the reality is we're up against different competitors, and we don't necessarily. Yes, we've got to compete to be healthy competitors, but we're not always competing.
I will come back to Sian and Melissa in a moment. I'm just going to push Rod on that one point. So the coming together in a new way. What sort of timeline are you thinking?
Oh, I knew that you'd ask the pointy question. All I would say is that we are continually discussing on how we can better work together as an industry, and that we are not divided. I'll leave it at that.
It feels, last question on this, I promise, it does feel urgent.
What was that?
It feels urgent.
Well, I think everything's urgent. We move at such a pace. The reality is that point that I go on about continually is that I think the pendulum swung too far. I think there's leakage out of total TV, and total TV I also mean all TV, not just the free-to-air broadcasters. It's swung too far. So I think it is urgent because we need to educate and learn from, arguably some of our mistakes, but also there is an urgent need because, as Bev said earlier too, we've got to invest in great content. And if the revenue leaks too far, then we can't do that.
Melissa and Sian, and I don't mind which one of you comes in first, what do you want to see from the local media players to help you help them?
I think the collaboration is key, and I think someone pointed it out and has talked about it being everybody's a competitor and everyone's a collaborator, which I think that should be how local looks at it. And then it's making it easier for us to transact and understand audiences. So bringing that together for us to sort of navigate as a local conglomerate, I guess, will ensure that there is a potential way forward in collaboration, and ultimately that drives, we need measurement as well on that, and they have to, I would say, put some backing behind that measurement, and ideally like put their money where their mouth is, to say, I guess, in a point.
What can you explain what you mean by that?
At the moment, and I'll bare basics, if you talk about any of the local players in linear TV, out of home, radio, it's all based upon an estimated audience or eyeballs. We would like probably to see some recognition on putting results or business results behind it and what we're buying as a potential. I mean, there is that out there, so an outcomes-based model would be an ultimate for an advertiser so that everybody feels like they're in it together. I know that's a stretch, but it would be a nice outcome.
Okay. Sian, I'm going to come back to you in a moment, but I do want to give Rod and Jodi the chance to respond to that point, first of all. How would you feel about an outcomes-based model?
Yes, happy to put my money where my mouth is, but we'd also like to see Mel the money come back as well.
Let's chat.
Jodi?
Yeah, look, New Zealand's a small market. There's 5 million people, so we need to try things differently. So if that's, you know, something that we can all test and learn on together, I think that, you know, I don't think any of the local media players would say no to that.
Okay. And Sian, going back to that original question of what would you like to see from the local players to help you do more with them?
I think maybe we'll bring it back to the first question you asked us about what the role of why local over some of the global platforms. Like, what would be great to see is doubling down on the focus of that local experience. Like, I think we have come on leaps and bounds on the experience that we are offering consumers who are watching in this market, and like, because we are competing against the big dogs, the platforms that have like this world-class experience, right? That is such a tough nut to crack in terms of, like, we were on this stage 3 years ago talking about the fact that somebody had watched a frequency of 24 in one, you know, like in one program viewing, and that's really tough to hear, right? So no one's going to get consumers watching back and like the dollars coming back.
And I think OzTam would say they've begun to help solve that problem. Would you accept that?
Yeah, but I think. But if we can double down on thinking about the experience and really playing to the heartland, then again, I go back to what is the role of an agency partner in trying to be able to do that. We've been really focused on asking the broadcasters to connect all the dots for us, whereas I think we can work and do some of that heavy lifting, because we didn't ask that of our digital partners that we started working with many, many years ago. They had a very easy ecosystem to connect the dots together. And so I think there's a really big role to play in being able to get out of your way to be able to focus on delivering the best experience.
Yeah, and Tim, I would say that we need to be better. There's no question, and we hear these points and we talk to our agency and client partners all the time. So we understand that, we understand the needs, but ultimately we want a successful campaign or client. ROI is important to us, so I understand the points, and we do need to get better in part. Particularly how we collaborate, so taken.
I remember sitting on, I think of Umbrella 360 stage about 15 years ago, hearing Matt Stanton when he was in magazines, talking about how magazines needed to get better. How do you go from saying the words to delivering on it, Rod?
Well, I think it just goes to the point, obviously collaboration is key across the industry. And I think if you get to the core of our business, it's around entertainment, particularly ours. It's an entertainment business, so we need to entertain all of Australians. We also talk about, as we talked earlier, and I did, democracy. Journalism's really important. So we just stick to the fundamentals, which I think is your point, and then support it with a currency that allows marketers and agencies to take that friction out of the transaction.
Ben, I do want to drill into something you touched on earlier, which is, I think, one of the opportunities. You talked about the opportunities around SMEs. What do you see as the kind of the future opportunities for local media, particularly with SMEs, and particularly kind of what the kind of the tech and the processes that will then underpin them?
Yeah, and I can kind of follow up even on the collaboration point. I think what you heard earlier from Mark on universal ads, underneath universal ads is basically first-party data from all of the broadcaster streaming services linked together so that you can measure at a census level. And I think historically the broadcasters have been disintermediated from their CRM data because they're going through distributors who kind of own the customer relationship. And if you look at retail media, the fundamental growth driver is the fact that it's census level first party data that's kind of authenticated. And I think for the first time ever, broadcasters now have a growing base of first party data that's authenticated. It's real people. It's not some programmatic ID model. And it also can be linked together. So I think the organizing principles like universal ads, whether it's that formally or informally, are great examples of being able to stitch together a full picture because it is very fragmented and very siloed. But I do think it's really essential because the only way you can make the buying process easier is if the data is accessible. So someone can define an audience and they can get a full picture of how that can be available across the different streaming services. So I think a byproduct of direct-to-consumer and streaming is first-party gold, and first-party data. And I think that's something, maybe there's an organizing principle. It doesn't have to be in conflict with any of the third-party measurement services because, by the way, it's great to have a third party to validate, but it's what are we validating? At the end of the day, you want to validate the ROI in that chart. Because if you're just validating, estimated reach, all these platforms look the same. But when you really measure the impact across the full funnel, brand favorability all the way down to sales, nothing delivers better than premium content. And it doesn't matter which platform it's delivered on. We tend to distinguish between, is linear, that point drives me nuts because linear is reborn in streaming. And the fastest growing segment of streaming advertising is linear streaming. So it's being re-expressed, and I think that trend is going to continue. And what's interesting is now you have the digital kind of AVOD, SVOD players realizing the only way they can really capture audiences is if they have linear content, which is why in the States they're bidding on sports rights and things like that. But I think to your point about SMB, it's just got to be very simple. It's got to be, no more challenging than buying search or social, but ultimately there's got to be what makes those platforms unique is they do have data that can give them estimated size of audience, and then if they want a website, I think one of the tricks that they do is kind of measure impression to website traffic, these really kind of what I consider attribution light mechanisms. So being able to measure the impact of television to things that matter most to SMBs. Did it make the phone ring? Did it drive people to the website, drive people into local retailers and so forth? The outcome-based measurement is also really important at a local level.
Well, building on what Ben just said, and I will come to you first, Jodi. This might be a bit, this is a lot in the weeds, but we might be in the right room for it. Ben's point on first-party data, how are you thinking about first-party within linear streaming?
Yeah, so we've just started to build out dynamic ads within live streaming to be able to sell a total TV proposition. So we're effectively just building that now, and we've launched that just a few weeks ago. And I think that the SME market that you talk about is really interesting because that allows us, we've just developed an MVP, effectively self-serve model to unlock that SME market, which traditionally, the big mass reach broadcasters haven't played in that space. So it's really interesting, there are advantages of being a small market, is you can test and learn there, and so we're working really closely with our tech partners around that. But also, how do we leverage AI to develop creative as a part of that? So we've unlocked some AI tools to be able to help those SME advertisers to be able to come on to whether it's our broadcast or our BVOD streaming platforms. So I think that's really interesting, and that's where we can really play with the data piece. So
and is that technology you've licensed or built?
But of both. So unlocking that first-party data is really important for that SME market, and we can start to test the more business outcomes. So that's a real driver for us in terms of the SME market is a test and learn market, and then we think about what learnings we can take from that to bring that into the broader, either broadcast or the broader agency environment.
And Rod, do you mind addressing that same point around first-party data and particularly within linear streaming?
Yeah, I mean, first-party data is obviously critical for any business, and the broadcasters and TV business has a huge amount of first-party data, and we're getting more and more sophisticated on how we use it, how we target our consumers, our viewers. So it's a critical mix, and we've also got supplementary data partners that we use. So we've got a really robust set of data, creating a big lake, and then if you think about that as a whole industry, it's pretty powerful.
Sian, you were looking quite thoughtful on that point.
It's just my face.
And I hope that there's one of those thoughts is around how you would like to see first-party data being used.
Look, first-party data is kind of the fuel that is going to power exactly where we need marketing to go, right? It is our job and our goal is we know that the most effective advertising, effective marketing is the best experience and the best path of purchase and connected ecosystem. We can't do that without first-party data. And I think where we've been having some incredible conversations with our local partners is what we can access, how we can use it in a really compliant way to better the whole experience that we are giving our consumers. And I think that's where we're seeing really impressive ROI and return.
Melissa, same to you.
Yeah, I think it's actually how you bring it all together. As Sian said, a lot of clients have got their own first party. It's looking at bringing retail into the mix as well. I think Ben made the point that's how the growth is happening on retail because of the strength of their first party data and what they can bring to the table. So looking at that three-way ecosystem of the clients, media partner, and whether that be a network and retail and how you bring that all together, that's the ultimate nirvana, I think, for a client and knowing their ROI. And there's ways that we're starting to look at that as well.
Okay, I think in the time available, we might only have time for one or two more questions. One I would love to get to is and I think I'll start probably with you first on this one, Rod. Obviously, there's this argument, just to marketers, to agencies. The argument is, well, be a good corporate citizen, support local. Beyond that, what is the hard business case for doing so? Because if there was one, surely the globals would be creating lots of popular local shows already.
Yeah. Well, actually, our local content on Paramount Plus is some of the most successful content. I don't think it's about supporting as good corporate citizens. I think that's a personal thing. I think as human beings, we should be looking at how you're spending advertisers' dollars or brands, where you're putting your marketing dollars. I think that's just being a good human being, knowing the fact that suicide rates going up, self-harm in youth's going up. So I think we've got to, that's the human side.
And you're linking that to the algorithms of the social platform.
And of course, exactly. But I think it's not about supporting. It's actually about supporting the success of your brand. We know from all the research that we've done, we know from what's been presented today, it actually works. It actually does drive ROI. It gets consumers into stores and they spend. We know it works. And we've got all the data and all the research and everything else behind it to support it. So yeah.
Jodi, I think you get the last word. Same question, the hard business case.
Yeah, look, I actually agree. I don't think you should do it because you feel like you have to. I think you do it because actually the audiences are there. And that's what I would ask all agencies and marketers is if the audience is there, if the data opportunity is there, if the partnerships and integrations are there and you have a choice, then it's a really conscious choice around being a good corporate citizen. And I think that's incumbent on all of the broadcasters and publishers to make sure they are as good and are offering a point of difference. And brand safety and trust and all of those good things are really important. Investing in local content because actually that's what audiences like watching is the reason why we invest in that local content. So I think it shouldn't have to be because you're forced to do it. It's because actually you want to do it.
We are out of time. Please thank our excellent panel, Jodi, Ben, Rod, Sian and Melissa.